I'd like to begin with a confession. At 25, I served on the side of the oppressors. You might have noticed that what I've just said, in some ways, brings my past into your present. This may sound strange, but the conditions of social oppression against people in many parts of the world, including here, have not really changed for the better. You may simply not see this oppression so clearly from your vantage point. Today's talk begins with the presupposition that you and I live in a mostly oppressive system. His talk presents the idea for us right now that we should question how portions of the ancient Christian message of liberation and peace can help us change our understanding of the present world and what we might do to create a better society. There's an interesting scene in the New Testament where it describes an officer of the occupying Roman army, the mortal enemies of the Jews, who approaches Jesus to ask for help. The centurion's young servant is dying, and this officer of immense state power feels completely helpless. He knows of no one else in the entire Roman Empire who might be able to save his trusted servant from what appears to be certain death. The soldier clearly knows something about Jesus, has certainly heard of his power to heal, to raise the dead, to give sight to the blind, to enable the lame to regain autonomy and dignity. It seems reasonable, therefore, to him that he should turn to the enemy for help. Let us consider for a moment whom we turn to first in our times of need. The centurion knows who has true authority. He implores Jesus to intervene in his personal affairs, to call upon the true cosmic power he knows he has no access to. This is a monumental act of humility. And Jesus, astonished by the officer's faith, assures the man that his servant will live. To the crowd gathered there to hear him speak, Jesus marvels aloud at the faith of a man who serves on the side of the adversary, and yet who comes, oddly enough, to the occupied and the oppressed to simply ask for a favor that seems, on the surface, quite impossible to grant. During those years when I served as an enemy of the faith and the faithful and marched on the foreign lands of the oppressed, I worked in a highly complex organization that fixes problems with non-compliant nations and people mainly through the delivery of sophisticated and extremely lethal remedies. It took some time for me to acknowledge to myself how this kind of work creates only great suffering and loss on both sides, despite the obvious evidence staring me in the face. Martin Luther King, a man who knew much about the conditions of oppression, captured the point nicely when he observed that an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. As someone who has, for the past 25 years, carried in his conscience great sorrow for this kind of blindness in this line of work, I have also found some absolution in the most sublime and comforting truths embodied in the simplest sayings. Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be opened. For everyone who asks, receives, and for those who seek, they shall find, and for those who knock, the door shall be opened unto them. These are very simple words, as you can hear. It strangely had no meaning at all for me when I read them as a child, trying to grasp why the Bible is such a revered and reviled collection of books. but I came to comprehend the universal truths in these words decades later. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, I served in the U.S. Army as an analyst and was asked one day, late in December of 1989, to examine the dimensions of a famous prison. I studied the prison complex, wrote a report, and submitted it to my superiors. The next day, I learned that this complex had been completely wiped out. Later in the same week, I entered the city where I had witnessed firsthand the devastation of the bombs that had been dropped. Massive concrete buildings that once stood proud were now reduced to smoking mountains of rubble and twisted rebar. Wooden structures lay in heaps of smoldering ash. The historic sections of the capital city of Panama lay in utter ruin. The places I had known, had visited for small talk and occasional drinks with friendly local people, had completely vanished in the explosive assault launched against a nation. The unfortunate scores of innocent human beings caught in the crossfire, whose remains mark the walls and floors of burnt-out buildings, were but spatters of dried blood, mixed with a thick and haunting whiff of death that hung in the humid air. As I was returning from the city in a daze, I witnessed a scene that would not consciously register in my mind for days. The corpses of guiltless victims being rolled into mass graves. Maybe I tried subconsciously to erase the scene from my memory, but as the weeks crawled by, images of that setting replayed in my mind, and the full picture became increasingly more vivid. The palm trees nearby, set against the blue sky, and the smell of the rotting corpses became mixed and fixed indelibly in my memory, and I knew, finally, the reason why I did not want to live anymore with myself, knowing what I had taken part in. Many years later, in my kitchen, as I was thumbing through some pages in the New Testament, my eyes fell upon the puzzling passage I had encountered as a child, the mysterious meanings of which suddenly unveiled themselves before me. I had wanted so much to find some peace, but I didn't know how to ask. I wanted badly to know what to do. And there, staring back at me, were words that might offer some way to reckon my past with that ever-present feeling of sorrow and regret. I say to you, as a witness of war, that it is nothing if not complete misery. Today we all hear the message repeated to us in the media that war, or our readiness for it, are necessary evils because the terrorists, whoever they are everywhere and ever seeking to steal our freedoms. This is why, we're told, we must support the ongoing war on terror. But I ask, if war is terror, how can we justify a war on terror? How can we live with ourselves supporting those who enact terror on others? How can we even stand to live in a world where leaders believe that killing, or supporting state-sanctioned killing, is just a part of living? Jesus, we can see in the gospel, came to destroy the chains of oppression and to free the captives. The chains are physical, intellectual, and spiritual. As for us, here and now, when we look around and actually acknowledge the sad social conditions surrounding us, we can say that we are just beginning to awaken to the kind of chains that have limited our thinking about alternative ways of living and remaking society in a way that is peaceful and just. When asked by the Jewish religious authorities when the kingdom of God and its goodness will enter the world to destroy Rome and its occupation, Jesus replied that the kingdom and its goodness are already in their midst. This particular goodness they seek is standing before them, with words that can pierce their cold hearts, awaken their spirits to transform their lives, and thereby society. The word gospel means good news, and it is so good to know that we can ask and freely receive the Spirit that teaches, opens eyes, and empowers us to act, to break the mental chains that enslave us. The Spirit of God has opened my own to the power in asking for forgiveness and acting in ways that build peace through kindness. I pray that you feel that kind of power in your life.